I don't know, Hala. I haven't heard anything of you. Wait! Was that a voice? I think that was a voice. What did it say? What? Hala, it did not ask for a bite of my hamburger. Come on, we're doing serious research here. No one is going to actually take us seriously if we're just talking about... Hey, it's you! Dude, did you see that? This could be groundbreaking. You know what else was groundbreaking? The discovery of electronic voice phenomena, because segue. For starters, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, electronic voice phenomena, or EVP, is audio captured on recordings that has no discernible source, and is believed by some to be voices of spirits, or snippets of other times or dimensions. Sometimes the audio is captured unintentionally, and sometimes it's in response to questions. Typically it's very brief, usually no more than a sentence, and more commonly just a word or two. And the clarity of the voice varies considerably, which has led to the classing of EVPs on a scale of A, B, and C. Of course, skeptics completely dismiss EVPs and believe them to be nothing more than auditory pareidolia, possibly equipment artifacts. Often they believe they're hoaxes. Since to believe in EVPs, one typically has to believe in some form of other existence, which isn't exactly a popular belief among scientists today. That said, even if you do believe in EVPs, the phenomena raises more questions than it answers. So let's get into their history. Between roughly the 1840s to the 1920s, the spiritualist movement gained popularity in the West. Their beliefs were defined by being able to contact the dead, and it actually became rather accepted to the point where seances were a popular entertainment at parties. Can you imagine doing that today? Like just having a party and popping out a Ouija board or inviting a medium unannounced? I think you'd probably lose a lot of guests. Anyway, one result of the spiritualist movement is that when sound recording was invented, the public was actually quite open to the idea of being able to record spirits. In fact, in the October 1920 issue of the American Magazine, and shortly thereafter also published in Scientific American, Thomas Edison was interviewed by the founder of Forbes magazine and was actually asked whether his inventions could be used for contacting the dead. He is quoted as saying, "I don't claim that our personalities pass on to another existence or sphere. I don't claim anything because I don't know anything about the subject. For that matter, no human being knows. But I do claim that it is possible to construct an apparatus which will be so delicate that if there are personalities in another existence who wish to get in touch with us in this existence, the apparatus will at least give them a better opportunity to express themselves than the tilting tables and Ouija boards and raps and mediums and other crude methods now purported to be the only means of communication." Some people believe that he did create a machine specifically for contacting the other side, dubbed the spirit phone or the telephone to the dead. In an essay entitled Spiritualist, which was published with many of Edison's diaries, he stated that, "I have been at work for some time building an apparatus to see if it is possible for personalities which have left this earth to communicate with us. I am engaged in the construction of one such apparatus now, and I hope to be able to finish it before very many months pass." It has been pointed out that Edison estate allegedly redacted 80 pages of the spiritualist essay before releasing it to Rutgers University 50 years after Edison's death. Make of that what you will. Edison was seen as an agnostic, but he actually speculated a lot on the idea of how life could survive death. He developed a theory of life units, which make up all living things but were smaller than an electron, and they would leave the body upon death and go elsewhere, but it would essentially keep the personality of the individual within a kind of swarm of life units. In his essays, the device he was working on is mentioned to be sort of like a valve, which he believed would be sensitive enough for the life units to manipulate. However, no plans, no diagrams, no patents, no kind of physical evidence at all has been left beyond his essays to indicate that he was truly working on it, and his estate does maintain that Edison never worked on any such device. Moreover, in an often overlooked interview with Edison from the New York Times in 1926, Edison was asked about the comments he made earlier in the American magazine, and Edison stated, "I really had nothing to tell Forbes, but I hated to disappoint him, so I thought up this story about communicating with spirits. It was all a joke." Other devices are sometimes presented as knockoffs that were inspired by Edison. One in particular that's often looked at is called the psychophone. However, the psychophone of that era was not built for communicating with spirits. It was actually a suggestive sleep device that would play recorded affirmations for you on a timer while you slept. There is actually a second psychophone, however, and this one was made by Franz Seidel around 1974 and was specifically designed to pick up electronic voice phenomena. It consisted of a tape recorder attached to a single form of radio receiver and amplifier, and it uses 3 different methods simultaneously: broadband receiver, self-sender radio transceiver, and a high impedance microphone input. The goal was for any voices coming through to be amplified and recorded. The circuit diagram is actually available on the internet for anyone interested in trying to make one themselves. However, the first EVP ever recorded actually came a decade prior to the interview with Edison. In 1901, in Siberia, anthropologist Vladimir Borgoris was recording Chukchi language and beliefs on a phonograph when, during a ritual performed by a Chukchi shaman, Borgoris recorded unexplained voices speaking in English and Russian, and a wolf howl. The recordings are currently the property of the New York Natural History Museum, and it is alleged that they were studied by the Minnesota State University but are still unexplained. Decades later, a psychic by the name of Attila von Szilai developed an interest in ghost photography, and subsequently ghost audio recordings as well. He began using a 78 RPM record in 1941 in an attempt to capture spirit voices. He switched over to magnetic tape in 1956, and he said that that's when he started to really get results. He would record using an open microphone inside an aluminum trumpet inside a soundproofed clothes closet, sometimes with a person inside, sometimes empty. His recordings were a bit cryptic. Allegedly, he heard one voice say, "This is G." Another one said, "Hot dog, Art." And another said, "Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you all." Gee, it seems ghosts were a lot nicer back then. Nowadays they just tell you to get out. Von Szilai began working with Raymond Bayless in the 1950s, and many of their experiences are documented in Bayless's book, Experiences of a Psychical Researcher. Bayless actually built a device that helped to further amplify the voices and was said to have much better results than a tape recorder alone. Later that same decade, Friedrich Jürgensen was recording bird songs in Sweden. When he played back the tape, he found voices, and it surprised him, as to his knowledge he had been alone. The first voice he heard was a deep male voice speaking in Norwegian and seeming to be commenting on birdsong. A few nights later, a second voice warned him, "Friedrich, you're being observed." Fascinated, he began recording specifically to try to capture these voices, and he began asking questions in hopes that he might receive a response on tape. Among the many voices he recorded, he claimed to even recognize one as that of his dead mother calling his name. which sealed in him the belief that these voices came from beyond the grave. On the 14th of June 1963, Jurgensen held a press conference to show the public his findings. One of the journalists objected. Acknowledging that there are voices of unknown origin on tape is one thing, but to conclude that the voices are from beyond the grave is something quite different. Friedrich responded, "Maybe not until you yourself hear a voice that is clearly identifiable as a friend or a close relative." This press conference succeeded in bringing attention to the subject of EVPs. However, what Jurgensen had hoped for was to attract the attention of scientists who could then conduct a thorough and methodical approach to researching the subject. Of course, this didn't happen. It didn't help that the outlandishness of Jurgensen's claims didn't stop at them being from the dead. He also claimed to be in contact with such famous figures as Van Gogh and Hitler. He claimed that there's a voice talking to his poodle, that some voices communicated better on a full moon. He even somehow threw UFOs into the mix. Dr. Konstantin Raudiv, a psychologist at Uppsala University who studied under Carl Jung, learned about EVPs through Jurgensen's book on the subject, and later through meetings with Jurgensen himself. Dr. Raudiv began gathering a team to catalog EVPs. Over the course of 3 years, Raudiv recorded around 72,000 voices under very strict, methodical conditions, such as recording in rooms shielded from radio waves, and asking unbiased individuals to listen to their recordings to ensure the interpretation of the messages was not just a product of preconceived expectations. Both Jurgensen and Raudiv discovered an interesting quirk of the voices. Many times, a sentence would be made up of multiple languages, a few words in one language, a few words in another, and so on. Raudiv was actually a polyglot who spoke around 12 languages, which put him in a unique position as one of the best people to probably interpret these messages. Unfortunately, it also put him in a good position to potentially misinterpret a lot of these messages, and it earned him a lot of criticism. That's actually a debate that's still going on to this day. Why does it not always make sense what language EVPs are in? I recall when Ghost Hunters International came out and everyone was just appalled that all the questions they asked were in English and all the alleged EVPs they received seemed to be in English no matter what country they were in. Like many aspects of the phenomenon, you can justify this literally no matter what you believe. It's either proof of pareidolia or it's evidence that on the other side language doesn't matter. Dr. Raudiv published a book on his findings, the English translation being called Breakthrough, an amazing experiment in electronic communication with the dead, which was released with a 7-inch record that contained recordings of some of the voices. His techniques garnered some criticism, however, as not only did he use white noise, which he believed aided the voices to give them a way to manifest, but he also recorded at normal speed and then slowed it down for playback, in which case literally anything could sound like a voice. However, his work did serve to bring the EVP phenomenon to a still wider audience. And that brings us to 1982 and Sarah Estep. Estep was an EVP enthusiast and founded the American Association of Electronic Voice Phenomena, or AAEVP, which was later succeeded by the Association Transcommunication, which has a very classic website. Sarah founded the AAEVP to increase public awareness of this phenomena and to educate about EVP collection procedures and help to standardize them. Bear in mind this was pre-internet, so the AAEVP actually became one of the primary ways of researching the phenomena and finding out what other researchers were doing. Sarah herself claimed to have captured several hundred EVP messages, and she did a tremendous amount of work for the AAEVP. She published a quarterly newsletter, wrote books on the subject, held conferences, and she is actually the one who established the classification system for the quality of EVPs that is still used to this day. These days there are a lot of devices designed to record, amplify, or otherwise assist with spirit communication, and specifically EVP. Starting in 1980, William O'Neill claimed to channel instructions from a scientist named George Mueller, who had died 6 years prior, to refine a device called the Spiricom, first invented by George Meek. O'Neill claimed at a public press conference in Washington, D.C. to have been able to hold two-way conversations with spirits using this device. However, no one has ever been able to replicate this, despite O'Neill making the specifications for the device public for anyone to build and try for themselves. Probably the most well-known device is the Ghost Box, or Frank's Box, first built in 2002 by Frank Sumption. It scans AM radio frequencies very quickly to create white noise, much like in Raudiv's experiments, with the theory that spirits can affect it to generate what they want to say by using snippets of sound from the passing audio frequencies. Obviously, it's still controversial. Nothing has really changed over the past 50 years. The human brain is still designed to see patterns. We can easily interpret random sounds as a word and find a way to connect it to whatever was just said. So the question is it actually a ghost communicating, or are we just hearing what we want to hear and believing what we want to believe? But there is actually a technique to address this, called the Estes method, whereby an individual wears a pair of noise-canceling headphones connected to a voice box along with a blindfold. Other individuals then ask questions of the alleged spirits, and the one with the ghost box cannot hear them. The person with the ghost box then repeats out loud anything they might hear from the box. Frank? Get out. But leave the hamburger? What? What? Oh. Oh. Ow. Hi friends, Wendy here, reminding you to please sit down while using the Estes method. Only you can prevent ghost hunting related accidents. This message has been brought to you by the letter G and the Foundation for Audible Recorded Transcommunication. This effectively eliminates a lot of the potential for contamination by our expectations and gives a more neutral interpretation of the sounds heard, which makes any potential evidence a bit more compelling. As we all know, paranormal anything is largely rejected by the scientific community, understandably, though discussing the ins and outs of why certain subjects are essentially a death knell to a scientist's career would take a video in and of itself. But nevertheless, there are currently, and have been in the past, several actual scientific, genuine studies carried out on a variety of Paris subjects. In the late 90s, there was a study entitled Failure to Replicate Electronic Voice Phenomena, carried out by Amance Barouche of the Department of Psychology of King's College, University of Western Ontario, and published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration. The title is slightly deceiving in my opinion, as over the course of 81 sessions, Barouche did report finding occasional apparent voices and interesting noises. However, Barouche blatantly stated in the study that they cannot be attributed to discarnate beings. Even so, Barouche offers a handful of possible causes, particularly that there are no anomalous phenomena associated with EVP, but also offers the hypothesis that experimenters create EVP effects through anomalous human-machine interactions, as well as the possibility of actual influence of electronic equipment by discarnate entities. Among other experiments carried out in the study, Barouche asked volunteers to listen to and interpret some of Raudiv's best EVP recordings, which were supposed to be readily apparent. However, when the volunteers were actually able to understand anything from the recordings, the interpretations they gave all differed greatly, both from each other and from Raudiv. There was also a study completed roughly a decade ago by Dr. Annabella Cardoso, which was published in the Journal of Neuroquantology. The study focused on instrumental transcommunication, or ITC, which includes both audio and visual phenomena, though for this study they focused exclusively on audio, so in other words EVPs. In a series of experiments conducted over a number of years, Dr. Cardoso and her team carefully ensured a heavily acoustically shielded and controlled environment, using specialized professional recording equipment and in a studio in the university in Spain that had been specifically designed to eliminate as much outside interference as technically possible. Cell phones didn't even have reception inside the studio. They used a variety of techniques, including silence, radio static, an EVP maker which uses randomized splices of human phonemes, and even the aforementioned psychophone by Franz Seidel. They asked questions of the voices, they talked amongst themselves, and they sat in silence. They obtained many anomalous voices throughout their study in many different conditions, often seeming to be in response to questions or statements, many of which could very clearly be understood by unbiased listeners. Most of the voices seem to be speaking in Portuguese, Dr. Cardoso's native tongue, though a few other languages were captured as well. Dr. Cardoso was careful to state in the study that pareidolia cannot be ruled out. However, I would like to point out that just because pareidolia can explain why we hear words, it doesn't explain what the noise is or where the noise came from. When the microphone is located inside a shielded room that in theory prevents contamination from any outside sources, and all internal noises such as chair scoots and stomach rumbles are accounted for, as far as I can tell, the only mundane explanation that's left is equipment artifacts. The question is then, is it even actually possible to determine if it is an equipment artifact, and if so, how, and why has that not been done? In the words of Sherlock Holmes, once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. I feel that Dr. Cardoso was definitely on the right track in trying to eliminate as many variables as possible, but obviously more studies with just as rigorous, if not more so, of conditions would certainly help, particularly as technology improves. Dr. Cardoso's study also indicated that the amount of EVPs captured increased when the participants were more relaxed and acting casually, not just being super quiet and intensely focused and studious. This is also something that paranormal investigators have observed. That activity increases when everyone is relaxed and casual, having fun, or maybe when things are more chaotic, like putting out equipment or tearing down equipment. There could be multiple reasons for this. If the environment is more lax, then there's probably more chance of contamination from mundane sources. Or if you subscribe to the idea of contacting spirits, it's possible the increased activity gives them more energy to pull from to manifest. Or something that, like living people, if you're more laid back and having fun, they may feel more likely to interact. If you would like to read either study, links to both of them are in the description. I highly recommend reading them. They're free, they're fascinating, and they go into a lot of detail. This is by no means a wholly comprehensive list. We would be here for a while if it were. This is just a discussion of the major contributors to the researching the phenomenon. There have been countless people over the past century who have captured voices that can't be explained, and some of their stories are quite extraordinary. Personally, I do firmly believe that anomalous voices and noises are being captured. However, the question is still open as to what they are. I don't entirely believe that they're caused by ghosts. However, like Friedrich Jürgensen, I do believe that no amount of testimony from others about their experiences will ever change your beliefs. You'll always find a way to justify how other people are wrong until you yourself have your own experience. Now, I'd like to end this video with an epilogue to the story of Friedrich Jürgensen. Towards the end of his life, he began experimenting with the idea of contacting the dead through the television. He passed away in October 1987. On the day of his funeral, his close friends Claude and Ellen sat in their home several hundred miles away, when Ellen kept hearing a voice in her head say, "Channel 4! Channel 4!" over and over. The couple eventually decided to turn on their television to Channel 4 at the time of Jürgensen's funeral that afternoon. At first it was just static, but slowly a small light appeared in the center of the screen and began to expand. Claude grabbed his Polaroid camera and took a picture, and as he and Ellen watched the photograph develop, a figure began to be revealed in the backdrop of the television. Ellen looked closer and then exclaimed, "My God, that's Friedrich!" This has been the Wendigo-A-Go-Go Show, signing out. Ghost cheese is pretty good.